welcome to Neo Psychology of me, your teacher, Mr. Neo, the channel where I teach online psychology lessons for my wonderful students. Today we're carrying on with the Psychopathology unit and we're looking at lesson 4, depression. Let's kick it. We use the word depression in our everyday vocabulary. Many of us have or will have suffered with depression in our lives at some point. Depression is known as the common cold of mental illness. But today's lesson is looking at what is depression. What is depression? So here we are. We've looked at the definition of abnormality. We've looked at phobias. Today we are looking at depression. This lesson is concerned with signs and symptoms of depression. Where phobias are characterized by anxiety, depression is characterized by low mood. It belongs to the general category of mood disorders. So, let's get the definition of depression down first of all. I haven't given you the words that go in the gaps because I think you can work them out, okay? I want you to fill in the gaps and I want you as a challenge, draw an image to illustrate the key term, alright? Let's engage our creative side in our thought processing. Think hard. Depression is a mental disorder characterized by low mood and low what levels? Energy levels, okay? Now, as we looked at last lesson, there are many different characteristics of depression. Can you match the characteristics with the correct definition? Behavioural characteristics, emotional and cognitive characteristics. Now, behavioural characteristics of depression are ways in which people act. Emotional characteristics are ways in which people feel, and cognitive characteristics refers to the process of thinking, knowing, perceiving, and believing. So here we go. 3 learning objectives. Explore the behavioral characteristics of depression, the emotional characteristics of depression, and the cognitive characteristics of depression. Let's start with LO1. Explore the behavioral characteristics of depression. Behavior changes when we suffer an episode of depression. Activity levels. The first behavioural characteristic of depression is activity levels. Typically, sufferers of depression have reduced levels of energy, making them lethargic. Lethargic is like when you feel really tired, you're feeling really lazy, you've got very low energy levels. This has a knock-on effect with sufferers tending to withdraw from work, education and social life. In extreme cases, this can be so severe that the sufferer cannot get out of bed. This is a behavioural characteristic, ways in which people act, okay? Low activity levels. In some cases, depression can lead to the opposite effect, known as psychomotor agitation. Agitated individuals struggle to relax and may end up pacing up and down a room. So, changes in activity level. Most people it's low activity levels. In some people it could be high activity levels is a behavioural characteristic of depression. The second one is disruption to sleep and changes in eating behaviours. Okay? Depression is associated with changes to sleeping behaviours. Sufferers may experience reduced sleep, insomnia, particularly premature waking, or an increased need for sleep, hypersomnia. Similarly, appetite and eating may increase or decrease, leading to weight gain or weight loss. The key point is that such behaviours are disrupted by depression. So, disruptions to sleep patterns or changes to your eating behaviours. It could be sleeping more, hypersomnia, or sleeping less, insomnia, or an increase in appetite and weight gain, or a decrease in appetite, weight loss. So I know when I was suffering with a small bout of depression, I definitely had a decrease in appetite and I did lose a bit of weight. Another behavioural characteristic of depression could include aggression and self-harm. Sufferers of depression are often irritable and in some cases they can become verbally or physically aggressive. This can have serious knock-on effects on a number of aspects of their lives. For example, someone experiencing depression might display verbal aggression by ending a relationship or quitting a job. Depression can also lead to physical aggression directed against the self. This includes self-harm, often in the form of cutting or suicide attempts. These are behavioural characteristics. Okay? Behavioural characteristics of depression. Can you identify one thing you've learned about the behavioural characteristics of depression? Why do you think learning about this is important? How does this apply in real life? Who is this information useful to? What questions has this raised for you? Right. This is incredibly important. Like I said earlier, depression is the common cold of mental illness. Many of us will suffer from bouts of depression. We will all know someone that is suffering from depression, okay? They may have not made it apparent, but if you know some of these characteristics, you can identify and potentially help those people. So, they are the behavioural characteristics of depression. Let's move on to the emotional characteristics. Learning objective 2, explore the emotional characteristics of depression. Now remember, emotional characteristics are ways in which people feel. Lowered mood. When we use the word depressed in everyday life, we are usually describing having a lowered mood. In other words, feeling sad. As you can see in the rest of this lesson, there is more to clinical depression than just a lowered mood, okay? But it is one of the key components. Lowered mood is still a defining emotional element of depression, but it is more pronounced than in the daily kind of experience of feeling lethargic and sad. Patients often describe themselves as worthless and empty. Now, this is the key difference here. All of us feel depressed at times, right? We feel depressed, we feel sad, we have a lowered mood. But we don't all necessarily have clinical depression, okay? Those that have clinical depression often describe themselves as empty or worthless, and you can see that's a more extreme emotion. Anger. Although sufferers tend to experience more negative emotions and fewer positive ones during episodes of depression, this experience of negative emotion is not limited to sadness. Sufferers of depression also frequently experience anger, sometimes extreme anger. This can be directed at the self or to others. On occasion, such emotions lead to aggressive or self-harming behaviour. Now bear in mind, if you have depression, you won't experience all of these characteristics, you'll experience a combination of them. The final emotional characteristic of depression is lowered self-esteem. Now, self-esteem is the emotional experience of how much we like ourselves, how much of our self-worth we have. Sufferers of depression tend to report reduced self-esteem. In other words, they like themselves less than usual. This could be quite extreme, with some sufferers of depression describing a sense of self-loathing, i.e. hating themselves. In the plenary, I've got a video of Stephen Fry talking about his bouts with depression, and he has clearly got very low self-esteem in the video. And those are the emotional characteristics of depression. Identify one thing you've learned about the emotional characteristics of depression. Why do you think learning about these emotional characteristics are important? How does this apply in real life? Who is this useful to? What questions has this raised for you? Right, this is useful, even if you're not necessarily a psychologist or a doctor or a psychiatrist, right? It's important to know about these clinical characteristics of depression. And that's learning objective 2 done. Tick! We are flying through. Now we're going to look at the cognitive characteristics of depression. Now remember, the cognitive aspect of depression is concerned with the ways in which people process information. People suffering from depression or who have suffered depression tend to process information about several aspects of the world quite differently from the normal way that people without depression think. And in a later lesson, we're going to look at explaining and treating depression from the cognitive perspective. First of all, poor concentration. Depression is associated with poor levels of concentration. The sufferer may find themselves unable to stick with a task as they usually would, or they might find it hard to make decisions that they would normally find straightforward. Poor concentration and poor decision making are likely to interfere with the individual's work. Yes, so if you've got depression, you may have poor concentration. If you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs that you should have learned in the approaches, we find that you need to have your lower, more basic needs met before you can move on to those higher needs. Like, for example, if you've got depression, your mental health is not particularly good. How are you able to concentrate on things like your education, which isn't as important as your mental health? You're not, which can result in the cognitive characteristic of poor concentration. People with depression also attend to and dwell on the negative. When suffering a depressive episode, people are inclined to pay more attention to negative aspects of a situation and ignore the positive ones. In other words, they tend to see a glass as half empty rather than half full. Sufferers also have a bias towards recalling unhappy events rather than happy ones, the opposite bias that most people have when not depressed. So if you were to ask someone, tell me about your life, you're likely to think about the positive things and talk about those positive things. But people with depression, their way of thinking is not the same. They have an irrational, faulty way of thinking which dwells on the negative. So if you were to ask someone with depression, tell me about your day, they're likely to dwell on the negatives. Furthermore, people with depression have this absolutist thinking. Most situations that we experience are not all good or all bad. But when a sufferer is depressed, they tend to think in these terms. Something is all good or all bad. They sometimes call this black and white thinking. This means that when a situation is unfortunate, they tend to see it as an absolute disaster. So instead of saying, right, this bad thing's happened, but there is a silver lining, it is positive, there is a positive aspect to this, they go, this is a bad thing that's happening, it's absolutely terrible. Okay, let's apply what we've learned to this application question about Jessica. Listen to the question, pause it, think about it, answer the question, okay? Here we go. Jessica is a 20-year-old university student. Her parents have been very worried since she returned home for a holiday from university. They hear Jessica up late into the night and also notice that she appears to have lost quite a bit of weight. Jessica is very sensitive when asked about this and snaps at her parents. In one argument, she says that she hates her parents and herself. In another argument, she says that she did not enjoy being at university and hates visiting her family. She shows no enthusiasm about returning to university after the holiday and has been unable to concentrate on a piece of coursework she has brought home to work on. Right, here's the question. 1. Identify the behavioural, the emotional and the cognitive aspects of Jessica's state. And then number 2, based on these characteristics, should Jessica's parents be concerned that she may be suffering from depression? Explain your answer. 5 minutes, give that a go. Pause the video, rewind it to have a look at the question, identify the parts that belong to the behavioural, ways in which people act, the emotional, ways in which people feel, and the cognitive, regarding thinking and thought processing, right? Those aspects of Jessica's state. Here we go. The behavioural aspects are Jessica's verbal aggression and the changes to her sleep patterns. She's also lost some weight. Those are behavioural. The emotional aspects are her anger and lack of enthusiasm. And the cognitive aspect is her lack of concentration on her assignments. Based on these characteristics, should Jessica's parents be concerned that she may be suffering from depression? Jessica shows some key characteristics of depression, so her parents probably should be concerned and possibly visit the GP. If you feel like you've got some characteristics of depression, Tell someone, talk to your parents, talk to your mum, talk to your dad, talk to your brothers, talk to your friends, talk to your teachers, or talk to a GP, talk to a doctor. This is confidential. Just share with them, and likely they might give you a diagnosis of depression, and the thing they're likely to prescribe is either going to be CBT, which is cognitive behavioural therapy, which is a talking therapy, you meet with a therapist, or possibly, but unlikely, antidepressants. And those are cognitive characteristics of depression. Identify one thing you've learned about the cognitive characteristics of depression. Why do you think learning about it is important? How does this apply in real life? Who is this information useful to? And what questions has this raised for you? What are you still wondering about? You get any more questions? Let me know. Put it in the comments. I'm not going to answer that. Right. Explore the cognitive characteristics of depression. Yes, we've done it. Right, we're on to the plenary now. Okay. Watch this video about Stephen Fry talking about his depression. Now, he talks about bipolar disorder, which is a form of depression where you go through bouts of really bad depressive mood to actually feeling perfectly fine and quite active. Okay.
There comes a time when the blankness of future is so extreme, it is such a black wall of nothingness. Not even of bad things. It's not like it's a cave full of monsters that you're afraid of entering the future. It is just nothingness. The néant, as the French would say, la vide, the void, the emptiness. And it is just horrible.
The actor, writer and presenter Stephen Fry can also see the beginnings of his bipolar disorder in his teenage years.
It came as quite a shock to me to realise that the feelings of suicidal thoughts that I had were actually rare, that these were not the norm. Many other feelings I had were perfectly normal, but the feeling of wishing my life would end and trying to do something about it, which I did from, I guess, 17, 18 a few times, that I discovered was not usual. And I suppose that is as good a time to date it from as any other.
In the late 1990s, Stephen Fry was appearing in a West End play when he went into a terrible depression. One night he sat in his car in the garage on the verge of suicide. In despair and confusion, he left instead on a ferry for France.
I saw these rows of, newspaper headlines and tears for Fry type thing, and I stared at it in complete disbelief. I mean, I was absolutely staggered. I can't believe I made people worry so much.
After realising he'd inadvertently prompted an international search for his whereabouts, he returned to London and admitted himself to hospital. He was diagnosed with bipolar disorder.
It's horrible to contemplate a futureless future, if that isn't too impossible. And so you just want to step out of it, to step out of the whole race, the whole business. The monstrosity of being alive overwhelms you.
In 2006, Stephen Fry was filming a documentary about his mental health struggles when he fell into a bleak depression.
For the last few days, I've been feeling increasingly depressed. Very sort of black stage at the moment, and would love to be somewhere else other than here, frankly. I'm fully aware I'm a very awful person to be with. I find it difficult to meet people's eyes. I find it very difficult to connect to people. I find it very, I just want to be alone, frankly. I'm just praying a little past, basically, because it's fucking irritating, and I hate myself for it. I mean, I've never thought that I hear voices, but I do have a voice telling me I'm a complete all the time in my head. Usually when I feel like this, I hide away. I can't this time. For me, that numbing kind of depression comes 3 to 4 times a year and lasts a week to 10 days. I spend the time in the house, staring at the ceiling.
Severe mood swings are still a central feature of Stephen Fry's life.
Mood to me is like weather. If it's raining, it's no good saying it isn't raining. It is real. That water is actually falling from the sky. It can take you by surprise because it can happen in a sort of crossover, transitional phase of moods when you're actually quite up. and you can't really make sense of it, because it's as if the clouds are coming in, but you feel good. So you think, this is really weird. Well, what's that about? And then, and it might be 2 days later that it's just got heavier and heavier. The best talking therapy is really listening therapy. It's not talking therapy at all. It's a room which allows you to talk to yourself, and most of the talking is done by the client or patient, and then just occasionally it's the usual thing of you're sort of saying, I know I shouldn't do it, and they go, why do you say you shouldn't? And then you say, well, yeah, no, you're right. Oh, yes, and it's bits of that. The thing that keeps one living is a sense of future, that there will be a tomorrow, and tomorrow I've got to do this, and then the day after I've got to do that. Not that any of these things have a particular logical purpose or a convincing reason to exist, but they somehow keep one going. In the words of Dorothy Parker, a great wit and writer and poet, you might as well live. So, she wrote. There comes a time.
And there we go. That was lesson 4 on depression. Okay, next lesson we're having a look at OCD. And there we go. Well done, my neo-psychologists. Great work again today. I'm very proud of you all. I've been Mr. Neo. God bless and peace.
I'm feeling like Will. I feel like a prince. I'm feeling myself. I'm loaded with bills, cause I wasn't blessed with no Uncle Phil. Don't know how it feels. I wanted to flex, they told me to chill. I'm making a flip. My life is a flick, now load up the film.